Now we can move on to the next session, which is the panel discussion. Karim, I leave the word over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to welcome you again. So I think we got a very inspiring discussion so far. In particularly, when we look at the market, what we heard from Agron before, the size of the business, we're talking about 840 billion projected. We're talking about investment funding size of 47 million. And now we had multiple discussions on the benefits of IoT. So companies are booming, and many of them could prove today that they're creating the value that is expected. I hope the sound is good. We'll continue if I don't hear from you back. So it was just projected. Thank you very much, Tor, for showing us the panelists. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you all. We have distinguished panelists from corporates, venture capitalists, but also startup. So Dean will be the startup CEO talking about also the interaction in the transaction business. And he's covering the security part, which we not covered so far. You can only give more confidence into this business if you make sure that the IoT is secure. So we have also, as I said, the corporate venture capital. Qualcomm Venture is part of us, and I'm very happy to welcome you all today. So what is important for me today is to highlight a few questions with regards to what has happened since last year. We also covered this topic. We will start with the impact of the pandemic. Omeira, we were together last year in Texas, one of the major IoT events. I just remind to the audience that you were sitting in multiple boards of very large corporations, but also passionate about IoT investment. So probably you can start and give us a perspective on the post-pandemic. We're still in the middle of it, but attractivity of IoT investments. Is the current pandemic helping us to accelerate the adoption of IoT? Do you get some more deals on the table today? So probably we start and give some perspective with you, Humaina, please.
Thank you, Karim, for the introduction. I hope everyone hears me well. Let me start by saying that, you know, pre-COVID and even post-COVID, we have still a number of real roadblocks for IoT. However, the short answer is that COVID has resulted, like in many other things, has resulted the fast sort of path to resolve these roadblocks, and I will give some examples. But let me tell you first, in my view, what are those roadblocks? Unfortunately, there are 6 of them. I know that's a long list, but it is. But the first one is really we have too many or too diverse connectivity protocols. Second one, lack of standards and interoperability. Third one is immature enabled platforms. Fourth is lack of cybersecurity measures for IoT. Fifth is difficulties in retrofitting legacy equipment. And sixth is still too high cost because of all of the first 5. So what has happened though, since pandemic happened, just like everyone else, digitalization basically is being accelerated, but with remote workers, all of a sudden, the very first roadblock, which was diverse connectivity protocols, are being accelerated to merge and to converge with each other. And how do we see that? We see that, I think the best examples on like September, I'll say recent, September 21st, Amazon selected LoRa for its new sidewalk wireless. September 22nd, a very famous startup, infrastructure, Senate, which is a champion of US LoRaWAN, got its next tranche of investments. But very importantly, just very recently, September 23rd, Ericsson announced that they are buying Cradlepoint for $1.1 billion for a company which is at 140 million in 2019 in terms of revenues, but growing 25 to 35%. And what was very interesting for me when I looked at that announcement, I want to quote the CEO of Ericsson, who I have had the pleasure of meeting, said, Ericsson is shifting away from creating bespoke and packaged vertical solutions for industry, which the company had made a part of its strategy a couple of years ago. We are now going towards more horizontally integrated cellular solutions. And I find that a key point in everything that we are doing. So what is interesting is when we looked at, last year we did a study to look at the stock price and share price of public companies in IoT. And what we found is when you look at the entire spectrum of IoT companies, it has performed more and less like NASDAQ. However, when you look closer and you look at the ones which are software or full solutions, you see that they have overpassed NASDAQ's performance by 25 to 35%, but the hardware guys have done worse by 20 to 35%, hence why when you look at the entire spectrum, they're roughly NASDAQ. That trend will continue. What we are seeing is investments, anywhere between 7 to 10 times revenues, not EBITDA. Those are the multiples. And you can see two recent examples. Google paid $450 million for 7% of ADT, which puts ADT at $6.5 billion valuation. And Omnitrax bought the smart drive business for $450 million. So with that note, I want to stop here because I think that gives you a lot of data point as to why I think this is accelerated now versus before.
Thank you. So what you're saying as well is that the consolidation is helping the first roadblock you're talking about, which is the fragmentation, as we talk about the major large global companies that are basically buying others, which will help in the process. Let us get another view from Bose, Qualcomm Ventures.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. So look, I think, that the question was specifically about COVID and not, about the entire IoT process. So if I need to analyze it, I think that there is short-term and long-term kind of implications. I think at the short term, if you look at COVID, I think it's actually had quite a kind of negative impact on, some of the businesses. Because if you look at IoT, unlike, just enterprise software, security and so on, which is, you can do basically remotely and then again, doesn't require physical intervention. When you look at IoT, factories or, other places which combines, physical world and digital world, and, that requires kind of a high touch sales and travels and so on. So many of the companies that we know and see will actually had a bad impact on this. Factories has to shut down, and even if you look at the way they have to handle IoT, I would say some of the projects were put aside for just, focusing on the here and now, how we actually go back to production after the lockdowns that was, hit Europe and so on, and now it's maybe coming back. So that's in the short term. But if you look at the long term, I'm actually think it's pretty positive, because I think what people realize is that the fact that the world has to be more digital, we need to go through this process. We cannot wait right now, the 10 years or so that, some of the industries could actually wait. There is a much more urgency right now to do it faster, to adopt things of, doing a thing more remotely, to adopt things of, less attendance in the physical world, to accelerate, some of the processes in the factories, in automotive and other places. And that's actually what we see now. And I think the overall, the impact will be positive. And I think right now I can actually see some of the, some of our companies we invested in and some others actually getting a very positive boost out of it. Even though in the short term, it's definitely, it's still hard right now, handling without traveling and so on.
Thank you.
Karim, sorry, if I can, I totally agree with Boaz. I just want to make sure that Where I said the acceleration is happening is more at the platform level. When it comes to application level, depending on the industry, some industries are hit, like retail. For example, Link Labs, which is a very well-known company, was providing asset tracking to hospitality for managing their people. Well, that's completely gone, you know, a business which has gone to zero. So, but I agree, connected industry or manufacturing is also suffering. But if you look at, for example, mobility, it's not suffering. In fact, so that's what OmniTrax does. When you look at logistics, in fact, that's where more growth is happening.
Aaron?
Yes, can you hear me?
Very well.
Hi, Karim, and thank you very much for inviting me, you and Agron and the entire digital team. It was a pleasure to listen to the speakers so far. And what I can offer is from the perspective of very early stage startups. At i3, we invest in pre-seed and seed stages. So this is, you know, two entrepreneurs and an amazing idea. And I can tell you that from that kindergarten perspective, the current situation is actually very helpful. Very early stage startups find that executives and buyers, when they do not have to decide upon big deals and big spending, they have a lot of time now to dedicate to some forward-thinking ideas and to plan for the future of after COVID, or at least after the first phase of COVID, and ideas that are interesting from a business perspective, much like David mentioned earlier, David from Ford. You start with an acute business problem that you're trying to solve, and you're using IoT related technologies to solve a real pain. Then we find that within our portfolio, there's a lot of patience now to listen to forward-thinking ideas and to even start POCs and trials to try and figure out how large corporations can actually get ahead and take ownership on the next phase of their existence by using the next generation technologies.
I assume that the valuations are also quite attractive right now. The appetite, so to say, for big multiple, etc., has reduced given the crisis. At least this is what I'm hearing from other industries. Is this the case also in the IoT space?
Well, valuations are very much relative, as you know, but I think risk adjusted, I don't think we've seen a huge change in startup valuations. We still see some mega deals, amazing seed stage deals where people invest a lot of money, almost not realizing the risk that's involved. That might change. I don't know if you've been watching the New York Stock Exchange in the last couple of days. The atmosphere there, it takes a little bit of time, but the atmosphere there trickles down, and also after a while, I'm sure will impact also our kindergartners at some point.
Peter, I hope that we fixed your audio issue. Can you talk now, please?
Let's see.
Try.
Can you hear me now?
Wonderful, excellent, right? So
Sorry
we got
about
the
that.
perspective right now from Aaron that it's a good time to invest, and he was looking forward. So what's your contribution there? How are you experiencing the market from your end?
Well, to be very honest, we're a private equity investor, so we're a little bit more on the, you know, I call it the laggard side of things. But nevertheless, what we have seen, of course, is a lot of stimulus that came from the governments that are now pushing into place a lot of the infrastructure that is eventually necessary to pull off this whole IoT promise that we have heard before. And so from that perspective, we've seen tremendous amount of demand, not just from, as I just said, you know, the regular buildup of the 5G infrastructure. It's also happening a lot on the data center side, and of course on the fiber side. So we have mostly invested in companies that are providing systems and components for network technologies, as I just said, for 5G and data centers. And those have seen a huge demand. And we believe that that is going to prevail. There is absolutely no reason to believe that this is going to wane very quickly, simply because what we've been also seeing is that more and more of these things have been pushed online and people are picking them up. In addition to that, what you can also see, and this is particularly true, of course, when you look into more emerging markets like India, a lot of the kids have become more accustomed to use smartphones now, where they previously were using feature phones. And so with classes having switched online, they're now having all these devices in their hands. The data demand will just go up more and more. The other thing, though, is that I think on the industrial side, and this is something that we see with a couple of our automation companies, there are definitely companies that are pushing and using this opportunity to deploy more automation, more IoT on the factory floor, while employees are working in different shifts or been sent home. So whether that is going to continue to be seeing this spike, I'm not sure. I believe that there will be some sort of like going through a revelation about how much is really possible once we came out of this. But there's also a social component to this, which I'm a little bit more wary about. So having said all this, I think this is a great opportunity right now to actually invest in these technologies. The question I think is more relevant is, where are these technologies deployed? Where is the market for this? And what you've seen before and what your colleagues have shown is actually Asia is still a very vibrant market for this. Probably also because Asia has done comparatively better than other parts of the world with dealing with this pandemic. So they're actually still plowing forward and leading the way.
I really love this panel because we have all the perspective from, let's say, the US up to Asia, from startup, seed investment to private equity, also shareholders and representative of major corporates. So we have a perfect mix to talk about these topics. Let me add another component coming from Dean now. As a startup company who has been dealing with multiple investors in the past, as a long-lasting experience, and also is covering security. So give us some of your perspective, and let's discuss also in terms of investment opportunity from the previous speaker as well, whether in the investment decision, the security plays a role, and what kind of role, and how do you check, so to say, the sustainability of the solution. But let's start with you first, Dean.
Sure, thank you for having me. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Exonius. We're a cybersecurity asset management company based out of New York and Israel, and we've raised over $95 million, have over 100 enterprises as our customers. And we see the IoT landscape of things from a security lens, but from many different angles, right? So we help protect organizations from unmanaged IoT devices that enter their environment and present risk to their networks. We also secure some of the biggest IoT manufacturers in the world. One I can mention is Schneider Electric. And obviously, we're also ourselves an organization that looks at IoT and how we can secure the devices on a global scale, and not just at an organizational level through our work with industry bodies and regulatory organizations. And it's very interesting to see how in the last few months we've seen how IoT plays a role in the security of an organization, and how that could go in very bad directions when you're both talking about a corporate environment with IoT. And some of the examples are NASA, who have recently been hacked through a Raspberry Pi that was in their network that nobody knew about or noticed. And another very good story of a casino who lost a lot of money that was stolen from them because of a hack that started with a smart fish tank that somebody connected to their network that nobody knew about. So
Dean, probably for the audience, if you can specify a little bit on the difference between the classical security issue we face in the IT space, and we're now talking about the OT, right? This is a different animal, so to say, and this is where the innovation is happening in adopting in the production IoT. So eventually you can highlight that for the audience and also for our panels.
Exactly. Great question. So in the past, we've been able to handle the IoT case of security through a very common tool called the agent, right? It's a piece of software that we install on Windows or Linux or Mac devices. And that's how we control those devices and make sure they're secure. And we've extended that when mobile came along into MDM. But when IoT comes along, the fragmentation of the firmwares and the versions is just too much. So anything that we learned about how to secure devices from our old IT world doesn't apply anymore in an IoT world because of the lack of ability of installing software on those devices and controlling them from that perspective. So what we've learned is that you really have to look at data and devices in a holistic way of how they operate between them, and look for the data as a relation to what the device is across different areas of your organization, right? Your identity provider knows one thing about your IT device, your network infrastructure knows one thing about your IT device, and your HR system might know something about your IT device. And we've lost that world where everything could just be collected through one source, and we're looking at a future where there's multiple silos of data across the organization that all need to come together for us to be able to handle and manage IoT devices from a security perspective.
Thank you. Probably reflecting back on the security and the transactions. So are you now feeling that the market, let's say from a startup perspective, is becoming more attractive? Are you getting more offer on the table, so to say? Can you just, related to COVID now, just a sentence or two, right? Just short to get a perspective.
Yeah, so our company, we announced our Series C funding, which was $58 million during the 26th of March, which I think was 3 days after the lowest point of the stock market. So raising funding during COVID is something that, while we experienced and I would never want to experience again, it was something that happened. And I think investors are seeing that there is an even widening gap between the best performers and the mediocre performers, right? So when interest rates are lowering because of COVID, there's more funds being available to the VCs and the late stage funds. But yet the amount of companies that they can invest in has seriously decreased because of COVID, because of the slowdowns and the problems of certain industries. So you think about, there's much more money on the VC side now for investment because of the interest rates, but also the winners have really grown and become stronger in the startup space. But many other companies have struggled. So it really minimizes the amount of companies they can invest in. And that leads to an increase in valuations and obviously funding round sizes. Yeah.
Thank you. Dean, just for the panelists who wants to reflect back on just the last two statements of Dean with regards to the investment, let's say, positioning, and then come back to this discussion on how important security is when you look at opportunities and discuss with the investment committee. So who would like to jump on the opportunity?
I can chime
Both,
in.
please. Yes.
Let's actually start with the security, just to add my perspective. We were one of the investors in CyberX, which was developed a security solution for the OT industrial market, and acquired by Microsoft 2 weeks ago. And I think the test is there, and you see it also now, not only in OT or industrial, but also for medical. You have companies like Medigate, CyberNDX, and so on. Is that you see, and also automotive, you see different new domains that previously or a few years ago didn't require any security solution because they were isolated. No one actually connect them before. And some of them are based on legacy devices or networks which were developed 20 or 30 years ago. It will take time to replace them, if any. So, and these industries are basically characterized by long sales cycles, and takes time to adopt things. What happened in the last few years that you actually see attacks that hit these industries, and that was very clear. You see factories that were actually getting out of order because of cyber attacks for a few days, and that's translated into loss of hundreds of millions of dollars because shutdown of a product line is definitely huge damage. So then you see the market begin to hit a bit, and eventually what happened is that the incumbents that we know from the IT cybersecurity, because this market was small at the beginning, they didn't focus their efforts to develop security solution for all the devices which have different protocols. If you look at the way factory or automotive, it's a different animal than the IT infrastructure. You have kind of PLCs and other devices with dozens of different protocols, very fragmented environment, which require research and development, which are different than what these incumbents kind of have. So what you see is that you see the startup developing these solutions, and now you see that once this market's becoming to be more interesting, then you start to see the acquisitions. You see CyberX acquired by Microsoft, and there were others, and I think that's a trend is going to continue and evolve. Mm-hmm. Regarding the investment, I agree with Dean. I think it's a matter of look. If you look at COVID, what happened before that is that you see a lot of money was raised by VCs, and maybe more like kind of pretty much expected is that once now there's more uncertainty, you see a lot of the VCs would like to get safer bets, if you may. So that's why they go into the growth company that already has traction and so on. Even if there is a hit because of COVID, they still have the market leadership positioning, and therefore you see these mega rounds. Only yesterday we heard of, even not in IoT, we heard about Next Insurance that raised a lot of money, and we see some other kind of mega rounds. So I think that's going to continue, and I think people still a bit more reluctant right now about seed. Having said that, I think it's a good time to. i3 is one of companies we invested in actually, and I think it's a good time to start, pre-seed or seed company right now, because this crisis won't last forever. It's going to take 1, 2, 3 years, and then things are going to back to normal. So it's a good time for people to go to the table and develop unique solutions. I think the one that's actually most struggling are the companies probably in the A or B rounds, which right now still not in a market leadership positioning, but they need to go and look for the customers, and now it's a bit harder, at least in some geos.
Any further contributions on the topics we just covered?
There's an interesting point that I would like to raise, which is this is Iran.
Please.
So the point is that physical cyber security parity is something that the industry has ignored for some time. If it's easier to bring down a power plant using cyber methodologies, then everyone will do it. Once it becomes a little bit more difficult, then other measures are also possible, which require for physically being at the site and causing damage using other ways. Now that OT security has kind of gone up a few notches, and it's a little bit more difficult to penetrate national infrastructure facilities, even though we still hear of incidents. One of our portfolio companies, Prisma Photonics, that can turn an optical fiber 100 kilometers long to an acoustic sensor, is seeing a lot of demand for perimeter security and long infrastructure security, oil and gas pipelines, water pipelines, power networks, etc. Because there are really no solution that can help monitor these kinds of long infrastructure, hundreds and thousands of kilometers long, 24/7. Of course, other side benefits are operational and maintenance related, environment related, and others, but we do see a spike in the demand, at least in this one company, for physical security, in addition, and also to augment all of the cybersecurity measures that people have been focused on in the last 5 or 10 years.
I think we heard.
I would add to Aaron, because I used to be on board of Veolia, which, as you know, feeds almost 2 billion people around the world for water. And what Aaron said is exactly on point, because one of my issues always was cybersecurity. And one of the ways of the defense is, well, the system of each plant, each water plant or each water system is isolated. It's never on internet, and it's actually local. So in order to access it, you actually have to break in physically and then access it. So it's very interesting. But so, you know, my view is was one of the issues I mentioned as, you know, roadblocks to full IoT adoption. And my view is till we totally resolve that digital identity for each machine or each sensor that we have, we will not be able to do, you know, expansive IoT adoption. And that, for me, there will be a lot of things that we are doing in the world of cybersecurity now that we would do also there, like user behavior, user being, you know, a machine here or sensor. So I just want to echo everything else you've heard.
I mean, obviously, Ingo from Osram, as a plant manager, was presenting his perspective on how they're interconnecting factories. This is a very critical point we always discuss when you implement a local campus solution. You want to make sure that the campus solution is completely disconnected from any kind of network. It just serves the campus where it is. And then you need to build a parallel network eventually to steer and interchange data without disturbing the local campus. So this is becoming, in retrofitting the element in the factory, very important, how to isolate and make the OT as secure as possible. So I think I'm happy that this is becoming also a very important point that we covered. I don't know if Peter wants to add something else.
Yeah, no, I completely hear Dean on the fundraising in the COVID times. I mean, the one thing that we're of course seeing right now, and that's very visible for us as being a industrial technology investor, where everyone in our team prides himself of having some sort of a deep industry knowledge and technology knowledge about the sectors that we pursue, is that this has become a field where only the experts, only the people who really are in the ecosystem understand where the options lie and where the opportunities lie. And that's why a lot of the companies that are currently trying to divest from certain assets are seeing major difficulties because they cannot attract the same amount of investors for that. So on the one hand, you have quite a lot of dry powder lying around, but it's not for everyone to actually deploy it. And so I guess once we come out of this, there will still be a lot of dry powder available and the pressure will still rise. So I would be very surprised if startup valuations would go down after this. I'm actually not very positive on that. So, you know, congratulations to Dean for that. I think that's a huge achievement. For some of us, we have found ways around the issue of not being there physically. But after all, this has become such a, you know, fear of missing out game that it's probably going to continue for a while.
We have 7 minutes to go, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to use the remaining of the time to cover one particular topic, future-oriented. So what are the hottest startup you see in this IoT field these days? And we start to hear about consolidation. Can we imagine one of the player consolidating the market become one of the next global company, thinking of what Google has achieved or other? Can we expect that? Who would like to build on that and give his perspective?
So is Karim, your question is that one player consolidate entire IoT or no?
At least having a few players. My assumption is that you will have the big companies, the Microsoft, etc., acquire a lot of IoT companies. It's not by accident that we have Qualcomm here. So I'm sure that Qualcomm will be also one of the leaders in the long term. So assuming this consolidation will continue, and now I'm asking what are the hottest startups you're looking at, or companies who are traded, let's say, and we may see further acquisitions in the next couple of months. The other question is, could one of these players, newcomer IoT, consolidate and become the next Google eventually? So what's your perspective there? Both, please.
Yeah, I think that, look, I won't get into one specific company, but my personal thesis, I think that the companies that has a better chance right now to win and become a big company as the one that has vertical solution versus horizontal. So someone, look, IoT just, you know, it's a very broad term, but then usually it combines things like, you know, connectivity, you know, bringing the gap between physical and digital worlds, and also other technologies like, you know, it can be an AI, whether it's vision or NLP. So if you have a company that's able to target a specific domain, right? It can be from agriculture, construction, agtech, you know, mobility, whatever, and able to provide a solution that actually going everything from the digitization of the domain up to the AI analytics layer to create a strong differentiation and defensibility. I think that's definitely can be a company that can grow, fast and become dominant. The other aspect I would say, because IoT many times involve a lot of hardware. If you want to build this vertical solution, so the one that's able to adopt new business model, for example, hardware as a service, other one that, in my opinion, be able to create a much more defensible and profitable business.
And it is one of them. So there are companies already adopting that model. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have some actually in our portfolio. So combining, I would say, the company that will adopt this vertical solution plus an interesting business model, that's the one that I think can actually become a market leader.
Maybe if I can chime in.
Peter, please.
Yeah, maybe if I can chime in, instead of answering it by going into a specific company, maybe just, let me provide a perspective on the different markets. So I don't think it's going to be a company in the consumer sector. I think that sector is currently really going through a realization of where people are becoming a little bit more realistic of what is really, worth it and what they really want to have in their homes or what they want to interact with. On the other hand, as I said,
you don't believe so much in the wearable?
Exactly, right? I mean, the Apple Watch is, of course, the exception, like every time it comes out, as with every new iPhone, no matter how much innovation is in that device. But I think the problem really is that it's going to be driven by something that is currently showing a lot of uptick. So what I said before about automation on the production floor, I think that is where the opportunities lie and where you will, of course, see the first to actually start to consolidate. Automotive, on the other hand, is one area where I've become a little bit more bearish at the moment. I think there is a lot of hype that has currently, become a little bit more stretched out with respect to the time frames.
So we have 2 minutes left. One answer each for 1 minute, so one takes it all. Who wants to?
Yeah, well, maybe I can add. I mean, I agree with the other speakers. I do think that there is a potential. I don't want to say I'm predicting it 100%, but there is a potential like Google and several other players like two other players take a stake on what's called a smart home, well, Amazon and Google. So I do think certain
Nest was a tentative already.
Yes. And they bought, but so my point is, I think that there are areas where it's going to be 2 or 3 players, and they're going to be some of the, some very large technology players, because they have to expand into other areas, and that's what they will do.
I was surprised that automotive did not come as one of the vertical, or you can think of the 3. If you go with 3 or 4 global OEM, then you have a market basically, and it's just a matter of sacks you get in and you're there for a while. So interesting that this is not on the table yet, and there's more skepticism about that, but probably there are other industries, right? So did you want to say something, or who wanted to add something?
I'm happy to.
Please, all right, go ahead.
Look, we are investing and we believe that we are building the category leaders of the future. So each and every startup in our portfolio has the potential to be the next Google or the next Facebook. that has to be the attitude, and that's how we think.
Your colleague will look at your portfolio anytime soon.
we have companies in the consumer space, in industry, and in smart city, smart nation. And we also have a compute infrastructure type investment. But I can tell you that, for example, a company called Vanti Analytics that is trying to solve the problem of the ability to use IoT data to produce interesting results to improve manufacturing without the need to hire a very large data science team and spend all that money and time on creating knowledge from all of that information. They have a system that can do it all without any kind of human intervention. So companies like that, when they get into a market that has tremendous need, if they can leverage this need and grow quickly with excellent execution, then they can expand within the same market into additional niches, and then use their market success to become much, much bigger. So you think big, but you act small in the short term to ensure.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, Erin, it's a long journey with you know, a lot of first of all, you need to succeed in one vertical, and eventually you can replicate your success in other markets. Probably, Dean, as a conclusion, are you happy with what you're hearing from the investor perspective? How do you feel as a startup IoT
Yeah, of course.
security provider?
I think that you know, from a security perspective, every organization is going to become to some level an IoT user. And with work from home and all the changes that we're experiencing from our geographical standpoint, I think that it's put the last nail in the coffin of the perimeter-based approach to security that nobody can count on anymore. That if something is in an office environment, it's secure, and if it's home, it shouldn't be secure. That perimeter is not there anymore, and I agree with everything said so far.
Well, then I'd like to thank all the panelists for your intervention, your perspective. I hope that the audience who participated by sharing questions, which I mentioned, I hope that they were covered the way you wanted. I'd like to thank you all again, and see you probably next year to talk about bigger investments or larger acquisition or consolidation and less fragmentation. Homer, you'll be happy, I assume. So thank you all. Good afternoon, good evening. And I'd like to hand over the session to my colleagues to continue. So Argon, you will do the wrap up with Sebastian.